I don't know if you remember 9/11, Kira. I know I don't really remember it because I was like 5. Even here in Canada, 9/11 was obviously a big deal. I mean, I don't know if it's like a big deal in other countries, but obviously it's a major day for most Americans, and I don't really remember what happened at all. I just was a little too young to remember. To give a brief summary for everybody, on September 11th, 2001, in New York City, two planes would crash into the Twin Towers. That were these massive towers in New York that everyone loved. They were really pretty in the skyline. And when the first plane hit, most people kind of assumed it was just a mistake. They thought maybe an engine failed, or maybe the pilot was just a little too low and didn't notice, and everyone was still like freaking out, obviously. But when the second plane hit, that's when Americans knew that this had to have been a terrorist attack. Because, I mean, planes don't just crash all the time, especially in the same location minutes apart. Two more planes would actually crash. One would crash in the Pentagon, and then another plane would actually crash into a field in Pennsylvania, but it actually was crashed by the passengers in the plane because they broke into the cockpit and knew that they needed to take this plane down because it was supposed to head to the White House or the Capitol building. Almost 3,000 people died from this terrorist attack, but there's one person that never gets remembered. He was the last person to die on 9/11, and he was a Polish man. His name was Henryk Siwiak. He had moved to New York almost a year prior, and on the morning of September 11th, his job was closed down and he couldn't wait to not work. He wasn't excited to go back to work. It was more so he just had to because he needed money. Unfortunately, this led him to taking a job that was late at night, and just when he was walking to this location, he was shot and killed. But no one knows why. He has been known as technically the only person murdered on 9/11 because they didn't include the terrorist attack numbers that day. Due to the terrorist attack, a lot of the police in the area were busy securing neighborhoods, patrolling Ground Zero, and helping civilians get evacuated, trying to rescue people, which honestly just meant that there wasn't a lot of police resources for other people. And unfortunately, a lot of people did use this to their advantage and commit crimes. When Henrik was shot, no one helped him. He died in the street face first, and he had already died by the time the police arrived. It's been over 20 years since Henrik's death, and his family is still looking for answers. And today, we're going to share his story and talk about what happened. Welcome to the Decomposing Flower podcast. I'm your host, Jen. With me is Kira. In this podcast, we discuss all different types of cases, true crime, cults, mysteries. So, we will, of course, be talking about terrorism, 9/11, murder. We will be talking a little bit about racism slightly in this episode. So, if that's just a little bit too much for you and you want to check out another episode, feel free to, or maybe go grab some water and have a bath. So, all of this information is found online and it is all put together so we can kind of do this episode. But because it's unsolved, I might have some information wrong or there might be gaps in this episode, and that's only just because we don't know everything. But of course, if you know anything and you want to correct us, please feel free to, or if you want to join in the discussion, feel free to. And again, I just want to say I'm so sorry if I say any of the Polish names wrong. I am trying. Henryk was like everyone else in New York. He was busy and he needed to work. He had actually recently moved to New York from Poland to visit his sister Lucina after he was laid off of work as a railway inspector. He worked really hard almost day and night just to make enough money so he could send some money back home to his wife and raise their two children. So his wife was still living in Poland and he had moved to New York. I'm not entirely sure if he moved to New York to visit his sister and then was like, oh, I kind of want to stay here and make some money, or if he went there for money. I'm not too sure exactly. but he did have intentions of coming back to Poland and building a new home. So I don't even know how long he was truly planning on being in New York for. So Henrik struggled very heavy with his English, and his sister had actually warned him that put him in a bigger risk in New York since a lot of people weren't very compassionate or patient with those who don't speak English. So it would also be harder for him to find a job. So he would actually take a lot of classes and he even watched TV with his sister to kind of grasp English better. So, what I could kind of gather from my own opinion about Henrik was he kind of viewed New York like a lot of us outsiders do, where it's like New York is this beautiful city of your dreams, and you're walking your dog down the street and you're falling in love, and you're just like, oh, New York is so beautiful. I love it. But the reality is, New York is just a city and it's a massive city, obviously, which means there's going to be a lot more crimes and it's going to be more dangerous. And, it's not all your little rom coms that we love to watch in the early 2000s. And obviously, New York and any city, it's not just like a New York problem. If you don't really speak English or you are an immigrant, a lot of people are just not kind. They're not patient. And I mean, I can't obviously speak for New Yorkers because I mean, I'm not a New Yorker. And I kind of find there is that vibe from some New Yorkers that they don't really like tourists, which I mean, I don't blame them because, when tourists do come to the city and they're kind of doing things where you're like, what are you doing? I remember when I went to Banff, this is a side note, and there were people trying to take photos with the goats, the mountain goats, and I was like, oh no, get away from those. They're going to hurt
Oh
you.
my God, yeah. Or when you see like they're on the side of the road and like people are jumping out of their cars to go get a picture, like a selfie with these bears, I'm like, buddy.
Yeah, I'm like, what are you doing? Of course, I understand, like, for some New Yorkers, they're very busy. They don't want a bunch of tourists standing in the middle of the road or just like the sidewalk. So, of course, there can be that. It kind of has that vibe, right? Like in any kind of city. And it seems like Henrik had that vibe that he really loved New York and he didn't want to believe it was as dangerous. Even though his sister and even his landlady were kind of like, hey, New York isn't, it's not all amazing, he would kind of brush it off, which, I mean, don't we all kind of do that? You're going to go to a city, you're going to you want to romanticize it. You want to be like, no, I'm like living my best life. Even though Henrik's English wasn't as great, he was able to secure a job in Manhattan where he did construction work. He would work at multiple different sites. One morning, for Henrik and many other Americans, their lives would completely change. At approximately 8:46 a.m., a plane would fly into the North Twin Tower. Most people were shocked and confused. They thought it was a mistake. Maybe the pilot just wasn't paying attention to how low they were because these towers were massive. They were around 1,368 feet or around 417 meters high. So, I mean, that's pretty tall. When it was 9:03 a.m., another plane would crash into the other tower. People were terrified, obviously. They knew that this wasn't a mistake, and obviously the president was like, "Hey guys, this is a terrorist attack." And I mean, obviously, I'm not going to go into the theories of whether it was an inside job or not, but a lot of people were terrified of what happened, and they didn't know if there was going to be more attacks, what's going to go on. And, most planes don't actually crash. And when they do, it's fairly rare. And again, to have two planes crash in the same location only a few minutes apart, that's not a coincidence. And then having a plane also crash into the Pentagon, like, that wasn't just a coincidence. And of course, the other plane that would crash into a field. So nearly 3,000 people were killed, and it's estimated that 25,000 people were injured. Almost everyone in New York was scared. They didn't know what was going to happen. And so obviously a lot of businesses were closed down because some of them literally didn't have a business anymore. Some people didn't have homes and it was just closed down to be secured, making sure nothing else is going to happen. And this included Henrik's job. Apparently, Henrik had actually seen one of the planes fly into the tower, which that would be so terrifying. When he was sent back home, he ended up calling his wife to let her know, like, hey, I'm okay, I'm safe. And she had told him, "Don't leave yet, like, don't come back, I don't think flying's pretty safe." So I don't know if Henrik was planning on leaving in the next few weeks or if he was still planning on staying there. But because he didn't have a job, he knew that he needed to go and look for a job still. So he ended up looking at some job ads in the Polish language newspaper, and there was actually a job posting for a cleaning service at a Pathmark supermarket in Brooklyn. It was an overnight job and he thought it was perfect. I mean, it's going to pay his bills, it's not going to be that hard. And so he ended up going down to the employment agency right away. This guy wasn't even going to take a day off, and he went to the employment agency to fill in some papers. Actually, when he was there, the owner, she was very distraught, but she was also upset because her husband worked in the Twin Towers and she hadn't heard from him since that morning. And we do find out later that her husband did unfortunately pass from the attack. But Henrik did try comforting her and trying to be there for her. I just think that's so sad. But there wasn't really a whole lot of information on exactly what he said to her or what happened with that woman or her husband. But still, it's really nice to see that he was trying to comfort her. So he learned that he could start that night, and him and his landlady got a map together and they were looking up a little route that he could take. And he was going to need to travel to Albany Avenue. So his landlady was very nervous, like everyone else, because of the attack. And also, Henrik didn't speak English that well, and this location he was going to wasn't the safest. And they weren't very welcoming to people that weren't from that neighborhood. So she tried to kind of be like, "Hey, why don't you just like stay back? Why don't you take a day to yourself? You don't really need to go out. Just take a day to yourself. And it's also really dangerous." And he was kind of like, "No, I'm going to do this. It's going to be fine." And she couldn't really convince him. And so he was going to start that day. So he didn't know the man that he was going to be meeting for the job, but he told the agency what he was going to be wearing, which will be relevant a little bit later. So, roughly around 11 p.m., he got off the train and began to walk west of Fulton Street towards Albany Avenue, which was only a few blocks away. One of the things that's really sad about this, too, is he actually had the wrong place that he was heading to. They later found that out, that he was heading in the wrong direction. So, like I said, this neighborhood was not safe. According to one of the lead detectives, they're a very tight knit community and they don't really like people who don't live in that area. They just, this is their zone. So, roughly around 11:40 p.m., residents could hear an argument and gunshots. One of them actually had heard their doorbell ring, but they didn't want to go out to check on it, assuming they were probably too scared. And I mean, this is a location that's not the safest, so maybe they were like, "I don't want to open the door." But a few minutes later, they could see a man face down in the street, and there was a trail of blood because he had staggered his way and had just fallen. Henrik was shot in his lung, and what had happened was after he was shot, he walked a little bit near the north end of Albany and he went to this townhouse to try and get help, but they wouldn't answer the door and he had just fallen face first. By the time the police even arrived, I think they only arrived a few minutes later, he was already gone. He was just 46 years old. Because again of this terrorist attack, a lot of the officers were on duty and some were working overtime, some had been called from their vacation, and a lot of them were patrolling Ground Zero or areas nearby trying to help rescue people. So almost the entire police force was occupied, which a lot of these criminals use this to their advantage. So the New York Police Department couldn't really use all of their resources that they typically would have used in a normal homicide. Normally, a crime scene unit would be called to secure the lot and collect evidence, but none of the members of that unit were available. There also wasn't that many cameras like there is now. They had to rely very heavy on witnesses and what they had to say, and no one had cameras, they didn't have a lot of phones, all that. So it was really impossible for them to find a perpetrator. From what they could find was Henrik was shot at 7 times, but he was only hit once right in his lung. They were able to rule out robbery because he had $75 in his wallet, so they don't really understand why he died. And they theorized that Henryk himself probably didn't know because his English was so poor. And maybe they had yelled at him to leave and he couldn't understand, but they don't really know if that's even the truth. His family and a lot of people believe that maybe they thought he was a terrorist. So Henryk is Polish, but he does have a bit of a darker complexion and darker hair. Some people think maybe they thought he was a terrorist because of that, and also he was wearing camel pants and a jacket and boots, which maybe they thought he was part of the military. And the fact that he struggled with English, maybe they thought he was a terrorist. It doesn't really matter if he was Arab or not, because obviously, if he was, that doesn't mean he should be shot and killed. But that is one of the leading theories that a lot of the investigators and even his family think that might have happened. It's very important to note that during this time, a lot of Americans, especially white Americans, began to hate Arab people, accusing them of being terrorists, and a lot of them were very unfortunately murdered during this time. Even some Arab families whose loved ones actually died in 9/11 were ostracized out of these help groups because people looked at Arab people like they were the enemy when it was just the extremist group, which is Al Qaeda. Even people that weren't even Arab would be accused of being terrorists, but if they kind of, looked Arab, people would just become very racist. Obviously, this hate did not start with 9/11. It's been on for centuries, but 9/11 for sure heightened this because the terrorists were obviously from the Middle East. It's important that we remember Henrik when we remember 9/11, and for his family. They still haven't received any justice. They haven't received any peace of mind of what happened to their brother, their husband, their father, and their friend. They still have no idea what happened to Henryk, and we probably never will unless someone does know some kind of information. I don't see a lot of people talk about him, and I just think it's very important that we remember people like Henryk that were murdered during this time, and also people that were murdered that are Arab, all because of 9/11, and all of that is just awful. But if you do have any information, I will leave the links in the description below that give you some more information, to leave some tips to Crime Stoppers, or you can call the police, and they are giving people a reward of $10,000 if you do have any information. So I will leave that in the description, but that's all we have for this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next one.